leaner than I was back then, 30 pounds heavier. Took me years, but I got there. And it's because my mindset wasn't proper. And with mindset also goes intellect. I think that, and this is another one that is going to make people rage, most people are not limited by their physical capabilities, they're limited by their intellectual abilities. They refuse to learn how to program. They refuse to modify their ways. They say, well, nothing worked. And then I sit down with them and I'm like, okay, have you tried this? And I'm like, no. Then what are you talking about? Sometimes you meet people and you're wondering what goes through their heads. Like people who don't have abs and they tell you, I've tried everything. And you say, have you tried isolating your abs? And they say, no. Well, you haven't even tried the first thing. What are you talking about? So this is not proper. And this is the majority of people. When someone like you says it, I receive it because I believe you. I know you've been hardcore. I know you've put in the work. So maybe you are the example of someone who now can say, I am limited by my genetics. My progression is limited by my genetics. That's receivable. But the average amount of the vast majority of people, until you've put in your 10 years, don't talk about genetics. It's just not proper. And it's what I say times and times again, because it's an argument of authority. Almost no one trains 10 years. No one. People give up all the time, or they tell you, I've been training for 10 years, but it was 2 months there, 2 months here. That's not training. That's not regular. That's not consistent. Once I think the majority of the population put in their 10 years, we'll find that magically the average genetic has improved. And the curve is going to go up because people are going to see what their body is capable of. So everything I say in terms of genetics is to push people in that direction. Stop thinking so much, get out of your head and put in the work.
Yeah, and I do agree. I believe I even said this in the video, is that for me, I know how unusual my situation is. And so if I just had a group of the general population, maybe my video should be heard by 5% of them. And even if I take the people who watched my video, maybe it should be heard by, I don't know, half of them. Like most people, it is going to be not that, and I'll get back to this in a second. I think the knowledge about the influence of genetics can still be important, but it's just so rare that people have like this idea that you're done after 4 or 5 years. I just think it is absolutely harmful and ridiculous. And like I look at like my brother when he started lifting, and he within about 4 years he was getting pretty close to me, and I would say my brother has better athletic genetics and probably just overall physique wise he could have surpassed me if he stuck with it. But things slowed down after 4 to 5 years, but it's like I was sure he could keep going. And even my friend I mentioned who was on the cruise with me, I definitely respect his work ethic a lot. But one thing I think he's finally going to do is I told him, like, you've never done a legitimate bulk. You've never pushed past your comfort zone. So as impressive as he is, it's like just commit to a 20 plus pound weight gain, because he's naturally a lean guy, and see where you're at. Even though it's been 10 years or whatever, you still haven't turned over every stone. And I think most people have not. So I do agree with what you're saying there.
Yeah. And this is where I join you in the frustration, because I have met people who had better genetics than me, who were freaks of nature. And every time when I see these people, my instinct as someone who loves human potential is to try to get them to push. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that you've tried, and I'm sure that you've seen the same result. They don't want to. And why do they not want to? Well, it's because everything comes so easy to them. I've met dudes who, and this is a story I spoke about on my channel. I used to have a roommate who was from Africa, and his diet was complete garbage. He would eat oily things all the time, chips. He had no diet plan. He didn't look at proteins. It was all over the place. He trained 45 minutes once or twice a week, only trained in summer because he hated winter. It was too cold. And the guy had a better physique than me when I've been training for 6-7 years. So first reaction is, why did I do to God to deserve this? Why is this guy blessed with these genetics? The thing that made me laugh the most is he had an app on his phone, and it was a randomizer, and he would click on it and it would tell him what to do for the day. He didn't even have a program. He let an AI decide what he did for the day. And he was better than me. He was leaner, he was bigger, he was more endurance, he was stronger than me. At this point, you have two choices. You say, oh, well, I'm quitting. What's the point? Or you think, well, that guy is not me. His life has no incidence on me, so I keep going. And the funny thing is that I'm still in contact with him, and nowadays I dwarf him. He's still 180. I'm much bigger than him. I'm leaner than him. I'm stronger than him. Why? I think it's because genetics can be a blessing. It's a blessing from birth, but it's also a curse. Maybe someone like you, if you had slightly better genetics, you would have gotten things too easy and you would have quit. And this is to sort of counter a point that you bring up in your argument that I think is a great point that I don't disagree with. It's the positive feedback loop. This idea that people stick to things in general because they're good at it. And they get feedback from people and from the world in reality that is gratifying. And because we love gratifying things, we keep going. So you end up with people who are going to be really good and they get better and better and better. I think that the counter argument is what I just said. Sometimes when things come too easy to you, it's not interesting anymore, so you quit. And then you have guys like you and like me, I would include myself in that don't get the best results from the start. And because of it, we want to insist because we're stubborn. So we enter into this mindset of, I will get it. I don't care what it takes. And the reason why I personally say that I have average genetics like you do is because you spoke about the fact that your progress was very linear and that you saw many people around you who exploded in size. And of course, we see that on YouTube all the time, the guys who gain 25 pounds of lean mass in a year. It wasn't me. I have a transformation video on my channel for people interested. I gained 10 pounds a year for the first 7-8 years. It was slow. And actually, when I saw your pictures, it looked like my pictures. The only difference is that you're slightly taller than me and you're lankier. You have longer limbs, whereas I'm very stocky. I'm a little bit built like a tank. I have very narrow shoulders. So I look bigger than you, but our progression was very similar for the first years. And then something happened. And that something, for my case, was a book. Well, what you said that some people, and I don't know if it's magic, I've discussed that on my channel all the time, but sometimes it seems that a crazy book that is completely unplanned and puts you into way too much of a fatty zone unlocks something. Now, I don't say that to encourage people to do the book. It's something I've noticed. I think that you can still get the same results with a slow book, something relative. But if there is a difference between you and me, it's this time period. Now, does it mean that maybe at this point my genetics unlock themselves? I don't know. It's not a discussion that's worthy to have because it's a comparison. But this is to bring it back to the idea of potential and the difference between individuals. That at the end of the day, it's going to be different from person to person and your journey is going to be different. But guys like us who didn't have the best results at the start might actually have to thank their genetics because it's what kept us in the game.
Yeah, a couple points there for sure. So just back to, it was your roommate, you said?
Yeah.
Yeah. Where in Africa was he from?
Nigeria.
Yeah, that's what I was going to guess. So I also had a Nigerian roommate. And Greg Knuckles also told a story about a hyper responder, also Nigerian. And basically, this guy in college would just lift like once or twice a week, 200 with abs, probably 5'10", repping 315. Like it definitely seems to be that corner of the world is where a lot of these freaks come from. It's pretty wild. So, but going back to, as far as like maybe it's better to start lower, I've said that many times, and not just with lifting. If it came easier to me, I have a very hard time accepting that a goal I set is not going to be hit, like to an obsessive degree. And I can only think of a handful ever that I've not hit, and it really bothered me that it didn't hit. And so because of that, it's like, well, I have to put more effort in. And when you put more effort in, both physically, but also psychologically, you are having a greater investment into this thing and you start to care more and more and more, and it becomes this cycle. And so even like socially, like I was a socially awkward kid. And that got me to be annoyed by that. I did not like that aspect. And I was like, okay, so I'm going to try. And I started going out to more parties and I started talking. Eventually, I became somebody who everywhere we went, like I just knew people and I was talking to people. But it's because I started below what I would consider average and I worked hard to increase that aspect. So I think that can apply to a lot of things. I always wonder, what is it that leads somebody who, comes naturally to either take off with it or to say they don't care? Because we can see that with certain things. Some people who are just naturally good looking, you see them 10, 20 years later, and it's just like, this person, like what happened? Because they never had to try, right? And again, the lifting example, sometimes it's an intelligence example. And then other people, it's like they start to care so much more and they get that positive feedback loop. And these are the best athletes in the world, or the supermodels, or, the people who are winning like Nobel Prizes and stuff. And I don't know what causes that difference, but it is interesting to see the two routes.